and he's lost, but that's fine. So I used to be a software developer in the 80s. I made the unfortunate decision to become a lawyer. Ended up being general counsel for one of the large internet service provider in Germany, hence the accent, and then came over here in 2000. And the one thing that occurred to me right away was, hey, we didn't end up building the World Wide Web, we built the commercial web. And that's what I'm most excited about fixing, and Ryan touched on that earlier, so we'll go a little bit into that. I mentioned I used to be a lawyer, so ignore the disclaimer. So what we refer to this particular paradigm shift to oftentimes is the Internet of Value Exchange. So the Internet started out with the Internet Protocol. We introduced a couple of other protocols. Actually, FTP was technically invented before the Internet Protocol. We have other protocols like TCP and then SMTP. Does anybody put a stamp on their email? No, right? That's why we have SMTP. And just like Ryan said earlier, we still accept the idea of sending money around and paying a bank for the privilege of doing so, when technically it's exactly the same. So that's why we now, with Bitcoin and other currencies, have what we internally call money over IP. But it's not going to stop there with blockchain. So yes, we got money over IP, but next we have assets over IP, so transferring titles and deeds. And one thing that I just managed to skip is identity over IP, and Ryan touched on that. This is going to become very, very important. I'm going to talk a bit about that later. Thankfully, he mentioned Satoshi, so I don't have to talk about this. The way I'd like to remember this is that Bitcoin created the first digital bearer instrument. So if you still carry cash around, that's a bearer instrument. If you give it to me, you don't have it anymore, I have it. Case closed, I don't need a middleman. And this is what's happening in the virtual world. So the important thing to understand here is that A, my slide is messed up, but then also that the internet right now works on application layers that extract the value. So most predominantly Google, Facebook, Amazon, Alibaba, none of those people developed the internet, developed any of those protocols, but they build application on top of that and extract value from that. And this is what you're going to see changing. So you will see that those values are going to shift to the protocol levels, to Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS, hey, and there's my background, to what we call the protocol layer. So oftentimes you'll find in popular media a lot of wrong information, including a variation of this sheet, which is typically titled FinTech. However, so the blockchain ecosystem right now is comprised of currencies, and you got a lot of developer tools, governance tools, you got tools for value exchange, shared data, and so this is, at the end of the day, where FinTech fits in. By the way, FinTech, totally made up term, really fancy term for window dressing, form of PayPal and other companies, which are really just the front end for what you're still doing with your bank, which is an ACH, and that's why it takes 3 days. So at the moment, if you look at the overall market cap of protocols and blockchains, you will see that the protocol level is dominating the market. So the overall market share, I forgot what it is, but it's a lot, is dominated 80% by protocol levels. So initially, obviously, that protocol was mostly Bitcoin, so that's the large gray area, but now slowly but surely altcoins and other systems are coming into play. So now market dominance of Bitcoin, this is what you will find on popular sites, is less than 40%, whereas over the most mostly in the past couple of decades or years, it has been 80% Bitcoin. So Ryan touched earlier on initial coin offerings, and they were a lot in the media and a lot of times for the wrong reason. And that's specific to the United States and the United States media and the people that drive that media here. So one fallacy is that initial coin offerings kind of went away at the end of last year. That's actually not true. Last year we raised $3.8 billion in ICOs combined. This year we already passed 6.1 billion. And a lot of that is not necessarily due to an increase in more ICOs, but larger ICOs. You probably have seen Telegram. And there also the popular notion that ICOs are being now contributed by mom and pop, not so much. The Telegram ICO, the last 750 million, were raised by 81 contributors. So ICO funding is typically, when you see this in your popular US media reported in US dollar, needless to say, none of these projects actually raised US dollars. They raised Bitcoin, they raised Ethereum, they raised maybe some other altcoins, but this is what's being reported, which is always wrong, because if you take one example, such as Teasers, this was the end game after the ICO closed, so they raised 65,000 some Bitcoin, 361,000 Ether, which at current market cap is somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 million if they still sit on that, which they probably mostly do. So one thing to point out is the rising tide lifts all boats. Who in the room has a digital wallet? Hands up. Awesome. Everybody who didn't raise their hand, get one tonight. If you have to, get a Coinbase account, start there, but then move on. What's really odd is that most of the currencies right now are being traded on centralized exchanges. Why is this odd? Because blockchain is the opposite. Blockchain is decentralized. What's also odd is, we're talking about this a lot in the United States, however, the largest exchange volumes are not in the United States. It's China, it's Hong Kong, it's South Korea, and the United States is at 10% at the moment of total volume on exchanges. So what we expect for the future to see more is decentralized exchanges. What you see there in terms of numbers below those logos is the 24-hour trading volume, which compared to the actual centralized exchanges right now is fairly low. But we hope this is going to change. Trading by country. Coin confusion. So if you paid any attention, the media is talking about the SEC moving into ICOs and the IRS taxing Bitcoin, and some states talking about the idea of getting paid their taxes in cryptocurrencies. For the most part, these are based on semantic errors. What I mean by that? The SEC doesn't get to regulate ICOs. It doesn't get to regulate technology. The SEC regulates you. The SEC regulates citizens just like every other government body. So if you're faced with regulation, what you're going to do as a technologist, you look for regulation that's more favorable to your task. And so most ICOs actually now actively exclude US citizens. So job well done, we are very well protected, we can partake. Reporting requirements are skipped, that's boring. Key blockchain advantages, Ryan touched on that, and he had his own slide, that's mine for this. So the number one key for me is it removes the middleman. The key to blockchain is I create a peer-to-peer system. So if you remember the initial things, voice over IP, voice over IP was a peer-to-peer system until Microsoft broke Skype, right? Or they bought it, same thing. But it was a peer-to-peer system that actually was based initially on a file-sharing protocol called Kazaa. The second one is if you can engage your community and customers with that. Everybody has heard about airdrops? Airdrops, anybody? Okay, everybody get EOS soon. Finally, this is the most important, not talked about subject right now. A lot of people in the room might have heard about the DAO hack. So where $35 million, quote unquote, were diverted, and then there was a big split, which we call a fork. And they called this a failure. However, DAO is a concept of the blockchain. It's a decentralized autonomous organization, which in the future will lead to this. For-profit corporations will have to compete with for-purpose corporations. The way I like to think about this, Google, who claims to be a search engine, which is not, it's an advertising company, has to compete with something that's decentralized, that can actually make search and the search result for their users the number one purpose of its existence, and put profit second. Good luck competing with that. Finally, Ryan talked about identity. Identity is something very important, and much more sensitized in this particular area are Europeans. It may something that's called GDPR, General Data Privacy Rights, get into in fact, what that means is that every European citizen can ask every company that holds their data to export that data to them, explain to them who they gave it to, and also ask that this data may be removed from their system. The fines for not complying with those regulations are 4% of worldwide revenue per infraction. So even very large corporations like Google, Facebook, and Amazon can be put out of business by not complying with that. Maybe even more important is the headline self-sovereign identity, which was initially coined by the United Nations. There's 1.1 billion people that do not have any form of identification. As a result, these people also obviously do not have bank accounts. On that same note, there's 2 billion people without bank accounts or other financial instruments, and there's 250,000 people in the United States that we call underbanked. So hopefully, this being a sovereign identity on the blockchain will solve a lot of these problems. And I spoke fast, so we have a lot of time for questions and answers, which I love.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much for sharing. On stage, and we have some theoretical time, so there are a couple of things we can explore with both of them, and then we'll open the floor to questions after that. Cool. So one of the first things, and this is more for you, Ryan, is that you've had experience developing a cryptocurrency, right? Metronome. Could you talk us through the experience, like what were the challenges, just briefly, but what were the highlights, I guess?
Okay. A lot of testing. So Metronome's a little different than other cryptocurrencies. It is an ERC20 token, which actually a lot of the ICOs are launching ERC20 tokens. The difference with Metronome is the contracts aren't going to be versioned and they're not updatable. So once the Metronome token gets launched, we're not launching it as a pre-token to another network like a lot of ICOs are. Metronome is going to be a transactional currency. So when we launch the contracts on the Ethereum network, they are done. We can't update them, we can't change them. All we can do is test, and test some more. So we're looking at every single attack vector we can think of. We have auditing, we have tons of third parties coming in, looking at our contracts. Chris talked about the DAO hack, and more recently there was a parity wallet, or a parity glitch in their multi-sig contract, where they lost was like $150 million because there was a glitch in their contract that they launched on the Ethereum network. $150 million because of a bug. And it was a guy in the GitHub forum that claimed ownership of the contract, because when you launch a contract, you actually have to set yourself as the owner of the contract. Well, when the Parity Wallet developers launched the contract, they forgot to set themselves as the owner. So the guy set himself as the owner, and then he deleted the contract. And he deleted $150 million along with it, and then he goes into the GitHub comments, and he files an issue on GitHub and says, hey guys, I think this is a bug, you should fix it. After he just deleted $150 million. So developing a cryptocurrency is terrifying, because you're dealing with a lot of money, you're dealing with other people's money, and in the case of Metronome, it is set in stone, so it is a lot of testing the code over and over and over again. But as far as the technical side of it, a lot of this technology has been around for 8-9 years now, and we've been through it over and over again. So the technology is pretty much there. It's just making sure that our version of the technology is well tested and well fleshed out.
Thanks. That's still a pretty cool experience to have, despite hours of testing, I'm sure. But I guess the next thing that we're interested in is that, Bitcoin and ICOs and all, that's the hot topic of blockchain right now. But as you mentioned, right, there's so many other applications out there, and a lot of them are actually almost ready to start being implemented or like being tested for implementation. Like supply chain is one that people are talking about a lot in terms of like perishable goods and food things that need to be transferred at a certain temperature, right? So like, instead of stopping on the way and seeing an issue, you have a smart contract that sends the information back and tells you there's a problem. What do you guys think is the immediate future looking like for uses of blockchain, or in terms of like a specific application or two? Where do you see this going? I guess now.
So it's still very early on. I mean, we have still very few applications on top of the existing blockchains outside of it being used as a currency. Overall trading volume, 56% right now is all speculation. So that means only like 44% is actually peer-to-peer trading, me sending money from my wallet to your wallet to get an item back or something else. Having said that, to us here in the United States, all of these things are not as urgent as they are for the developing nations. Like if you had never a bank account, all of a sudden you have the ability to transfer money just using your smartphone, right? So it's a huge advantage, immediate need. Same thing with an identity. If I never had one, now I get the option to verify myself using a couple of buttons. And so that's kind of where we put our focus on right now, building the infrastructure and supporting the infrastructure projects out there and the small application layers on top of that to replace any of the middlemen. Yes, all banks need to go away. Everybody who is a middleman who just takes money out of the system without adding any value needs to eventually go away, and the sooner the better.
I think one of the biggest issues right now is this whole idea of a trust economy, and there's like related to that, there's a lot of hesitation with putting PHI and PII, so personal health information and personal identifiable information, onto a blockchain. What do you guys see as the major obstacles in the roadmap? Do you think there will be a time in our near future where those things can be put on blockchain in a trustworthy manner, or do you think that's a sort of a reach, or what are the obstacles in the way, I guess?
This is an interesting debate because we just had this talk just before. There's a weird thing when you're taking encrypted data and you're putting it on the blockchain, because essentially you have to keep in mind anything that goes on the blockchain is public. So now you have encrypted data that's forever public, that's unchangeable. And if that encryption that you put your data through is ever cracked, now your data is forever public. And we're seeing encryptions cracked all the time as technology gets improved over the years. Even the government encryptions that we use today, in 10 years from now, who knows? So we could be using the best encryptions we think are secure now, and then we're putting our data public forever. Just from an engineering standpoint, and once again, that's terrifying, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a solution for it. There's algorithms out there that they're working on to be quantum computer resistant and all sorts of things. But I honestly, I don't remember your question. I got so distracted with putting the information on the blockchain, but I'll let Chris answer it.
Yeah, you want to do a cost-benefit analysis, right? So that means if I have a rare disease that only a few people on the planet have, I want to share my particular case, and hopefully a lot of people on the planet share it as well, so that we can all start working on that, right? And on the other hand, no one really needs to know my bank account number, right? And that should be private. At the same time, what we've been doing so far apparently doesn't work. Everybody knows about the Equifax hack, where basically everybody's social security number got stolen. So these decentralized systems don't provide the answer for sure. We know that already. So whatever we're doing moving forward is likely going to be better.
And I think finally I'll ask one more question to both of you before we open it up to the floor. And that is for people who are interested in blockchain. I'm talking about the college level, like most of us are college students. So if you are interested in blockchain, let's say not everyone's from an engineering background or computer science background, what ways are there to like keep up to date with it? Like what are your sort of like biggest sources of news and information and learning? And B, in terms of like thinking about careers and getting into a space where just keep learning, what are the places we should be looking at? So for me, my solution to that was like going to consulting, for example. But there's a lot more out there for sure. So for both of those, if you have any advice, I guess.
Sorry.
Well, the one very unique thing about the blockchain is it's immediately multidisciplinary. What I mean by this is, as a lawyer, you have to work with your technologist. As a technologist, you have to work with your game theorist. Those areas all integrate. The other thing is, blockchain presents a huge paradigm shift. So it doesn't matter what area you're in right now, you'll find a project online right now that's trying to change the way things have been done in this particular space right now. So look for those. I mean, follow your passion, but then see what's coming down the line. And again, if you see a decentralized autonomous organization tackling this particular problem, you can assume that this particular entity will win. In order for you to shut down Bitcoin, you have to shut down the internet. Bitcoin has 500 times the computing power of Google. And if you turn back the internet, turn it back on, Bitcoin is right back. And that's the same for any system that's truly decentralized. The litmus test for you is this. If I can take away the entity and the blockchain goes away, it's not decentralized. In my mind, it's not actually a blockchain.
So for news, I would say there's so much happening in the space. It's happening so fast. I couldn't keep up with it all. I built my own news aggregator, so I basically scrape maybe 5,000 different news sources around the world, and then I aggregate it. And so I have my own news feed. It's bitnews.net if you want to check it out, but I think it's broken right now, so I should fix it. For like ICOs and cryptocurrencies, it's happening so fast, and there's so many new projects. I've lost track of a lot of the projects. I'll go to Crypto CoinCap and I'll look at, CoinMarketCap, and I'll look at the top 100. And if there's one that I don't recognize, I'll just go, I'll read the white paper and I'll see what they're doing. A lot of them, sadly, a lot of them are redundant at this point. Some of them have really cool tweaks to their technology. The other joke right now is any two guys, a white paper and a dog, can raise $100 million overnight with an ICO. And we're seeing a lot of that also. But there is a lot of really cool technology out there to be researched. If you personally want to get into blockchain, if you want to get into the space, from an engineering standpoint, I would say learn JavaScript is a good start. Just about everything through Node.js now is winding up to be JavaScript. If you really want to be a core developer, you can go C++, but even Ethereum is all JavaScript based well, they have a Go instance with Geth, but really all the modern programming frameworks, you can learn Go, you can learn Node, you can learn C++, but if you have the aptitude for that type of thing and the really interest and drive, it's getting into blockchain from a programming standpoint is not difficult anymore. There's so much information out there about it. There's so much documentation about it. You can go on YouTube and you can type in Ethereum programming or contract programming, and you can probably learn it in about an hour. It's really not that difficult to get involved. The amazing thing is there's an extreme lack of engineers in the space right now. I've been looking for a lot of developers. I've been interviewing developers over the last month trying to get them on projects. And there's not a lot of developers that are making the move from the web development and startup community over to blockchain yet, even though there's a ridiculous amount of money in the space. So there's a huge amount of opportunity. There's a huge gap to be filled. So if you want to get involved, I encourage you YouTube it for an afternoon, learn some of the technology, and start looking into some of the jobs, because there's a lot of need in the space.
And sorry, there is one more question I'll ask before. Super quick, in your opinions, what are the 3 coins to look out for at the moment? Sorry, I have to ask if you open up the floor.
Number 1 for me at the moment would be EOS. EOS raised a lot of money. They have a big fund that they're going to put to good use, funding projects that they're building on top of the platform. Also, if you're holding EOS at that point in time, you're getting those tokens that are being issued on top of EOS as well. It's still relatively affordable. The other one would be just the classics right now. If you want to limit yourself to 3, probably wouldn't do that, but it would be the classics. Would be still Bitcoin and still Ethereum. Just get a couple of those that you can afford, put them on a ledger, on a Trezor, and just keep them in your drawer for a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll be very surprised if they weren't worth a lot more than they are today.
I agree with EOS. I know some of the core developers there and a lot of the people backing the project, and I've seen the same technology booted up with BitShares and a couple other projects in the past. They have a really talented team, so I think EOS is a huge one. A couple other shameless plug, Metronome. I'm working on it, so I have to back it, right? I think it's going to be very important, especially with the future rails of having a bunch of different chains. One of the key concepts of Metronome that we're working on is being able to export value from one chain and importing it onto another chain using smart contracts. So essentially, you can move your value cross-chain without an exchange. So we're really excited about that. Quantum is another great one. Once again, I work at Block, so a lot of the projects I'm most familiar with are the ones that we're backing and we're working with. Quantum is working on the EVM, which is an Ethereum virtual machine, so it's decentralized contracts, decentralized compiled code. They launched a full node into space on a satellite, so they can actually sync up to a node that's in orbit right now. They're doing some really, really interesting things. Probably the third one, oh man, I don't know, there's so many cool ones. Oh, that was great. I'm not doing one.
Cool, thanks. I'm sure also be keeping an eye out. We have time for like 2 or 3 questions, so sure, just speak up, please. Awesome.
So a lot of people are always like, use a white paper, but like, what do you look out for a white paper exactly? Like, how do you know some, like, if you look at their website, sometimes they have a good website, sometimes they're not very clear about what they're doing. So how do you figure out what coin is doing exactly what, and how to like, basically analyze it compared to other coins doing the same thing in the same space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what he was asking is, what do you look for specifically in a white paper, and how do you identify differences versus other coins in the same space? It's hard because if you look at Satoshi's original white paper, I think it was, what,
9 pages.
9 pages, very short. A lot of the white papers coming out now are like 30, 40, 50 pages. Some of them I read are like 80 pages. I'll skip the first third and start looking for anywhere they start listing formulas, and I'll start checking out the math, and I'll find out a lot of the white papers just pulled math off of Wikipedia and stuff like that. It's hard. There's so much fluff out there, and there's so much, I guess, trickery. I don't really know how to label it, but there's a lot of money floating around, and there's a lot of money to be had. There's a lot of people trying to get at it any way they can. So when you're trying to find unique projects, when you're trying to find unique things, coin market cap is great because you start seeing what everyone else is investing in. I mean, they're the top cryptocurrencies. They have the most money behind them. I typically like to start there, just go into the project's website, look at their white paper, and start kind of reading what their unique model is. What's their proposal? Where's their value coming from? What you'll find out is you'll start seeing the same thing over and over and over again. But you have to look deep a lot of times to see the differences. I don't have an easy answer for that one. It's just you got to read.
Yeah, so that's kind of our daily bread and butter. And Amir, who is somewhere around here, does most of the hard lifting for us on our team. So we have 157 different criteria. We are looking for. A big tell is the obvious one, it's GitHub. So if you're seeing that there's one developer contributing to the project and there are big gaps in there, that's a big tell, big no. The other one being what we are looking for is there already funding to it? Because there is venture